welcome to another episode of Facebook Live with Veterinary Referral Center of Central Oregon. I'm Jen Bentley, one of the dermatologists here. I've got Shelby on the video camera who will be fielding your questions for the discussion. And I've also got Dr. Sean, one of our ER doctors, and as well as Punch, who's will be the star of the show too. So Dr. Panella, if you want to introduce yourself to everybody, that'd be great. Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm Sean Panella. I'm one of our ER veterinarians here at VRC. I moved here about 2 years ago from Tennessee, and I love it here. It's awesome. So yeah, relatively new to Central Oregon and to cheatgrass, but I've had my fair share of exposure by now. So yeah.
And was there a lot of cheatgrass in Tennessee?
No, there's actually, it doesn't even really exist down there. The climate's too humid because it exists more in dry climates. So yeah.
Well, if you couldn't guess already, we are talking about cheatgrass, and if you want to join the discussion, please join the discussion. Please share the discussion with anybody else. We have a good program going on, but we do want to hear from you guys and do want to hear about your questions. But I'll just get started off. What exactly is cheatgrass, and why are we so concerned about it as veterinarians?
Yeah. So it can be a real pain around here. It's a winter annual brome grass, but it's basically kind of a tall, or a couple feet tall type of grass that grows that. In the winter is when it's green actually, and then the summer it dries out and sheds these seed heads.
Okay.
And these little seed heads cause a problem because they burrow their way under dog's skin. And they can get in their ears and between their toes and create nasty abscesses in the back of their mouth, the back of their throat. So yeah, they can be a real pain, but we try to do everything we can to get them out as soon as we see signs that there might be one somewhere.
And how common is it in Central Oregon?
It's very common. So we're taking cheatgrass out of dogs on a daily basis. Unfortunately, it's just across the street. I actually picked a bunch of cheatgrass, and I'll show you in more detail in a few minutes. But that's how it looks, and it's pretty much everywhere. So it's difficult to avoid. Very common issue, and actually just a few minutes ago, Dr. Stockdale pulled a cheatgrass out from between a dog's toes. So yeah.
And we're actually going to be posting a video of that later on today, so be sure to check that out.
Yeah.
It'll be pretty cool. But definitely something where you don't want to be in that situation.
No.
Do you have any recommendations on how to avoid this stuff?
Yeah. There's a few things that people can do. I think that it's hard to avoid just geographically because it is so many places.
Mm-hmm.
But there are ways you can avoid it getting caught up in your dog's hair. And so in the summertime, frequent cleaning and grooming of your dog actually can help, because if mats form, it actually makes it to where these little seed heads will kind of stick. Which makes, then they'll burrow into the skin if they're hanging out somewhere and they've moved enough. Another way would be to just kind of generally avoid areas that have it, which is difficult to do. But if you're going on a hike and you know what it looks like now, then you could potentially keep your dog on a leash and keep them from roaming around in areas where there's a bunch of it present. So you can physically avoid it, but keeping them groomed, checking their feet when they come in from outside. If you went on a hike somewhere where you know there's cheatgrass present, then you can always look in between your dog's toes, kind of look close to their ears. If they're coughing, if they're gagging, shaking their head or anything, which we'll talk more about signs in a few minutes. But yeah, just basically give them an overview or a look over and make sure that you don't see any hanging out on their fur. So, but unfortunately, it's everywhere, like I said, so it's a little hard to completely avoid at least.
Well, that's interesting. It's a good point. Like grooming can be really helpful, making sure they have a good clean coat so it doesn't stick as much. So this is what cheatgrass looks like.
Yeah. So this one would probably be the easiest to show. They actually kind of come in a variety of shapes and sizes. And that one's huge. Typically the ones we find in dogs are of the smaller variety here. So I don't know if you can see that, but so they have these little barbs on them, and as a dog moves, they work their way up into spaces. And so it can sit on a dog's skin, and if, say, it's in between the toes, it can actually work their way under the skin, and sometimes we'll find them under the skin up pretty high. So yeah, it can be a bit of a nightmare for sure.
Yeah. So if you're just joining the conversation, we are talking about cheatgrass, and please chime in with any questions that you have. And it looks like, Shelby, we've got one question. Not yet? Okay. So we've talked a little bit about avoiding cheatgrass, what it looks like. And so what are the clinical signs that animals will have once they get this in their skin?
Yeah, so a lot of times it depends on the location, so they can have a wide variety of clinical signs. So we'll just kind of start with each location. So if there's a cheatgrass in your dog's ear, usually what people notice is they'll be shaking their head a lot. They may even be scratching or pawing at their ear.
Right.
And sometimes even they're kind of tilting their head to the side because they're uncomfortable and they don't want to cause any compression. They probably lean the way the opposite direction of the side that the cheatgrass may be in. If it's in the mouth or the back of the throat, oftentimes they'll be gagging, retching, coughing, sometimes even vomiting. And then if they're in the nose, a lot of times they're snorting, sneezing. They'll have some nasal discharge. And then with the skin and the toes, you're looking for kind of small areas of swelling, any evidence of an abscess. There's a distinct look of a kind of interdigital abscess with a draining tract that happens in between their toes. It's actually in that video that you'll be able to see. Yeah.
You know, let's play with your feet.
So if you're checking in between a dog's toes for cheatgrass, it's especially challenging in a blonde-haired dog because the cheatgrass is a similar color. But his hair is short enough where we would be able to find it without too much trouble. So when they come in from a hike, just part their toes. Sometimes you can kind of run your thumb or one of your fingers up.
It's got princess feet.
And sometimes you can even feel the barbs poking out before you even see them. But if you spread them out wide enough and look up high enough, usually you'll find something if it's there. And then you can look under the foot as well. So below the paw pad under here. So it's got to be pretty thorough. But if you see it in other places, always check the feet. Check around the ears or anywhere else in the fur. Sometimes even especially in females, we'll see them around the vulva on the back end. And so if they're draining or looks like they have an abscess back there, that's what it could be. And then lastly, sometimes they just show kind of nondescript lethargy. They don't want to eat their food because they may have an abscess, which could even be causing a fever.
Right.
Yeah.
I can definitely say I've pulled out cheatgrass about this big out of a little tiny Shih Tzu, and I'm like, oh, did it get down there? That dog was super uncomfortable. I'm glad we were able to get that out. Do you have like a weird case that you've seen with cheatgrass? Where's the furthest you've seen it migrate?
Yeah. So another thing is, it can actually end up in their body cavities too. And so I've seen dogs that end up with the cheatgrass actually in their lungs, causing an abscess there. And in their abdomen too, and their GI, and sometimes they'll migrate out to the skin after they've swallowed it from their GI. So they can go pretty much anywhere. But a recent case that I had that was interesting was one where there was one in between the toes, or it looked like there was because there was a tract, and actually we ended up finding it all the way up under the skin on the forearm. So they can go pretty far, especially if they've been in there for a little while. So catching it early is great.
Did you guys have to use advanced imaging to find that, or you just kind of follow the
So
track?
that particular one was actually just with forceps, but I'm glad you brought it up because sometimes, and I would say even in some cases 50-50, especially if the swelling's under the throat or somewhere else, we can't find them even after we sedate the dog and look. And so occasionally you have to use imaging modalities such as ultrasound and CT, and that can at least give you a general idea of at least a more narrowed down location.
So definitely doing a once over on your dog after they've been out running around and this stuff is important to catch it early so it doesn't go places. Any other advice for our viewers before we sign off here?
There's one thing with grooming. Sometimes I used to work out in Prineville, and sometimes clients that lived on ranches or somewhere where they're saying we can't get rid of it. It is hard to get rid of, but normal weed killers will kill it. They actually would just shave their dog's feet in the summer because if they have a long-haired dog, and sometimes that would be helpful because it'd make them easier to find and make them less likely to stick up in there between the toes. So.
And I'll just share one more story with our viewers. I actually had a case where the dog not only had probably, I would say, 30 cheatgrass in its paws, but it would also appear to be allergic to cheatgrass too. Massive swelling too. It was an allergic dog, had environmental allergies. So that was a whole nother problematic issue on top of that. We were able to get things under control and move on to cheatgrass and treat an actual hypersensitivity reaction. Because I've never seen it, but yes, that dog was super uncomfortable and feeling well. So, well, thank you for joining our discussion on cheatgrass. We will still take any questions afterwards, and please feel free to join us every other Wednesday at 4 p.m. for our Facebook Live events. And thank you.